Hello and welcome in. Eddie Radosovich, George Stoya, Josh McQuestion, and 27 Oklahoma Sooners have signed, or new Oklahoma Sooners have signed. It was pretty basic. It was a basic day. Taylor Tatum made everybody wait just a little bit. Freaked out a couple people, I am sure, but all 27 guys are accounted for. The 27 that you expected, led by a star-studded defensive line group. Welcome into the Soonerscoop.com National Signing Day live stream. We will get into all the position breakdowns. We'll get into everything that pertains to the 2024 Oklahoma signing class that now wraps up. 27 in the can today, up to number 8, I believe, in the on-3 team rankings. So, gentlemen, George, Josh, welcome in. Josh, today is your day. I know there is a big basketball game tonight. Bob might try to break in here shortly, but a good day for Oklahoma all in all. We talked to Brent Venables this morning at 10:30. You can watch that in its entirety, the press conference that Brent had this morning on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube page as well. And today's your day, Josh. 27 guys. There weren't any surprises. Taylor Tatum, the number 1 running back in the country, made some people wait just a little bit. But all in all, this is a really good class, another top 10 class for Brent Venables.
Yeah, you guys, and we were having our group chat, and I heard Brent start talking about Taylor Tatum, and I had
freaked out a little bit.
I was like, oh no, this is a terrible mistake. I was truly concerned. And then you guys were like, no. The Oklahoma had announced that it was fine. I was like, okay, I just missed it. I got locked into, I think I was writing the story and listening at the same time.
Yeah, so, Mike Howe cut in to Brent Venables' press conference is basically like, yeah, he signed. And Brent was like, you sure? It was kind of funny how it happened off screen. And then obviously the good news. Sorry, go ahead.
No. And really, I mean, guys, I would say, and, I've gotten into this on Twitter today. It's not like it's the norm to have flips on signing day, but there usually is a little more sweat. There's a little more, okay, this guy, somebody got in his ear. That wasn't really the case, because even with the Taylor Tatum stuff, I think there was some entertaining of, okay, maybe he's gonna wait till February, but I didn't get the impression that was about another school.
Sure.
So much as just kind of making sure everything at Oklahoma was going to be what he expected. DeMarco Murray wasn't going anywhere. There weren't going to be any more, changes in the play call or that kind of stuff. So I think it was more about him just being sure of the scenario than, another school had really caught his eye or anything.
No Josh, doubt. when is the last time did they sign everybody in their class last year too? There's no signing day mishaps. I know you tweeted out that stat earlier about, I think it was only 2 in the last 250 signees.
Yeah, I went back through and had to go. I went all the way back to 2012, and there have only been 2 signing day decommitments. One of them was Jace McClellan in 2020, I think that was Jace. And that was the last one. I'll struggle to remember the second one, but that Jace was the most recent one, and that was one of those ones that everybody kind of knew was coming. It happened on signing day. But it was one of those deals where, his mother was on Twitter and, was kind of telling people, oh, no, it's fine. But everybody knew better. It was just one of those deals where he'd been to Alabama several times there towards the end. So, yeah, I mean, it's just not very commonplace. So you kind of expected it to go the way it did. And, I put it up on the board last night that I just wasn't expecting anything crazy to take place. But as ever, stuff like that scares you. When you think stuff, that's usually when something goes terribly wrong. And that was really my only concern, was just like, let's just make sure nothing's out of place here.
We're obviously going to get into a bunch of the Oklahoma stuff today this evening throughout the live stream. We'll get into position by position kind of breakdowns of everything and Josh's thoughts on it. Just overall, signing day, I had this conversation this morning on the radio. It just seems like nowadays that with as much as already out there, there just doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of buzz around an early National Signing Day because there is so much expected. I think in the top 100 guys, only 2 guys were set to make some type of announcement today. You might have a DJ Lagway situation where he kind of strings it out, and you kind of wonder, okay, is he going to end up out on the West Coast, or is he going to honor his commitment to Florida, that kind of stuff. But just overall, were there any like big surprises to you today? Florida State loses a couple five-star defenders, just little things. It wasn't like a big, massive, grand scale sweeping, that type of situation.
Well, I mean, because now, guys, even on top of all the early commitments and everybody enrolling early and those sort of things, well, now you have more and more guys that are taking part in bowl practices. Sure. I think Oklahoma has, I was doing some checking with some people today. I think they have almost 8 of their 20 early signees are taking part in bowl practices. It's crazy. So, like, it's crazy. And that, of course, only just accelerates everything. But I think when you look at it, the big one is probably KJ Bolden flipping from Florida State to Georgia. And I know people say, well, he's a Georgia kid. He's a Buford, Georgia kid. And for whatever reason, that program has just broken Georgia's heart over and over and over again. Now, maybe Georgia took whatever NIL they had earmarked for his Buford teammate, Dylan Raiola, and threw it to KJ Bolden, and that helped push it over the line. I don't know. But, guys, this is twice in 3 years that Florida State has had their heart broken by a Georgia DB on signing day. 2 years ago it was Travis Hunter going to Jackson State. So Georgia, I mean, obviously Florida State can't stop recruiting DBs in Georgia, but man, you're going to be scared until they sign for all eternity, probably for some of the Seminoles fans.
Florida State's just had it rough the last few weeks now. Really, Florida State fans.
Florida State and Florida has it's been a pretty rough run. All right, let's get into Oklahoma. I mean, I think that's probably why everybody is here on the live stream to get our thoughts on an Oklahoma 2024 class, 27 guys. We heard Brent Venables kind of lay out the numbers this morning in terms of what they're also going to be looking for in the transfer portal. He kind of didn't even hint. He said that they wanted to sign 4 offensive linemen from the portal. We can get into that stuff, here in a little bit, because I think that we should start where everybody probably wants to hear about it. And the defensive line group that Brent Venables, Todd Bates, Miguel Chavis were able to bring in. Josh, you've been on record as saying this is a group that, could end up, George, you wrote about it today on Soonerscoop.com. This could be a group that when it's all said and done, as you're looking in with the names on the paper, with the 5 guys that they signed, David Stone, obviously the 5-star, Jaden Jackson, an IMG teammate, Danny Okoye from NOAA up in Tulsa, the homeschool, Nigel Smith, the 4-star out of Melissa, Texas, and then Wyatt Gilmore, a Rogers, Minnesota, just the second Minnesotan to sign with Oklahoma. That 5-person group or 5-player group, maybe one of the best defensive line groups that Oklahoma's brought in the last 20 years.
Yeah, and with Gilmore, I mean, obviously the place that no one's expecting me to start, Gilmore is only the second Minnesotan that will play at Oklahoma. I don't know if the other is a walk-on. I have no information about.
Just know there was one.
I just know there was a player from Minnesota that played for Oklahoma once upon a time. So, but yeah, guys, I mean, the thing that you look at when I look at this defensive line class, and obviously, and Brent kind of hinted at it, they're still looking to add a couple of pieces. Dominic McKinley, D'Alen Evans. We'll see what happens with them. I think those are very unlikely, but there are guys Oklahoma's going to continue to pursue, assuming they don't sign here in this early period. But beyond that, you look at David Stone, you look at Danny Okoye, you look at Nigel Smith. In the right situation, those guys have first-round kind of talent. That is what you're talking about here. And you've got 3 of them in one Oklahoma defensive line class. And then you throw in Jaden Jackson, who, as things currently stand, might be the best player of the bunch. So, you throw that in, and then again with Wyatt Gilmore, a guy that, talking to Wyatt a little bit, I know you guys had a chance to talk with him in the signing day preview thing that we had up on YouTube. He's a guy that fits Miguel Chavis just perfectly. I mean, he is a high motor, great work ethic. He is very much in that kind of Ethan Downs mold. Although I think he's probably a little more flexible. I think there are some things that I think translate a little better to defensive end for Wyatt Gilmore. But again, it's just a special group. And Stone and Okoye are the 2 that a lot of people will point out. Okoye obviously dominated the U.S. Army Bowl earlier this week. And, with David Stone, you're talking about one of the elite defensive tackles OU signed in the last 30 years. I mean, that really is where that conversation, goes. It's him, Gerald McCoy, and, a guy like DeMarcus Granger. I mean, those are really the only types that are in that sort of ranking. So you just can't overstate how much Oklahoma needed this to happen and how important it is that they actually finish the job.
It feels like, too, and Josh, you and I talked about this earlier today when I called you. They've missed on so many guys on the defensive line throughout the last, 10 to 15 years. Like, it just felt like they always came up short when it came to those elite guys. And you talk about David Hicks and, you guys were throwing out names like Solomon Thomas, Marvin Wilson, like all these guys dating back to, 2010. It's crazy. And I was looking this up today, but during Brent's 10 years at Clemson, he had 12 defensive linemen drafted, 5 in the first round. During that same span, Oklahoma had 9 defensive linemen drafted, but they have not had someone taken in the first round since Gerald McCoy, who obviously Brent recruited. And so it's insane. And that's not to say, these guys are going to be first-round players, but
Sure.
they are. This is the most talented group up front they've had in quite some time. And I think for them to do it too, going into the SEC next year, which I think probably benefited them in recruiting some of these guys, is pitching them, hey, you get to play in the SEC. But to be able to do that, and I know they didn't get everybody in the class that they wanted to. Williams Nwaneri is still out there. Dominic McKinley, obviously, still out there, those type of guys. But to be able to get those 5, I think, was just a massive win for Oklahoma.
It's huge. And and that's the thing people have to understand. When you're chasing that many, I mean, they were talking about signing 8 defensive linemen. And I think, they still would like to add a couple guys in the portal. Like, we all know that. But when you're chasing that many elite guys, I mean, guys, there was a point there where we're talking about this group along with Dominic McKinley and along with Williams Nwaneri. I mean, you go down the list and it was such a holy cow, this could be unbelievable. But you're going to miss on some of those guys. Nobody, Nick Saban doesn't land all of those kind of guys. Like that's just not the way any of this works. And I mean, guys, a good example of the winding road of recruiting. Oklahoma turned away Ja'Shawn Ross, who signed with Alabama today. Like that tells you, that you sometimes have to make this tough decisions that you're not overly excited about. But at the same time, it tells you the kind of guys that Oklahoma was recruiting. I mean, Ja'Shawn Ross was nearing a commitment at the time that Oklahoma had to pull back from his recruitment. So they were definitely fishing and in the deep end, I guess you'd say. And so you're going to lose some guys. Some guys are going to get away. But I think it says a lot that they were able to close on this group. And like I said, not just a bunch of, these guys are really good high school player and we'll see how he develops. These are ultra talented guys that Oklahoma now has to go and push forward and kind of continue to help them grow their games.
Conversations after we got done recording as well, leading up to the commitment of David Stone. It was such a kind of like, think he's in. Everybody feels good about it. You'd never really know. That seemed to be kind of a momentum shifter, though, when Oklahoma was able to get David Stone in the boat, and then everything happened in the month of September, adding Nigel, and then it just seemed like Jaden Jackson was already in the boat recruiting David Stone. But you went down there. When you talk about David Stone, and I think especially for Oklahoma fans that have followed his recruitment all the way going back to when he was at Del City High School, it just seems like he was such a big figurehead in kind of being able to add a little oomph, if you will, into this defensive line group that was already pretty good, but then you added in David Stone, and it just seemed like that almost kind of skyrocketed things, especially with the national perception and being able to go out and get somebody of that caliber, Josh.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that, I mean, Jaden Jackson, I kind of wrote in the story today, but I thought Jaden Jackson was the domino that started everything. But if you're going to look at it like that, as a row of dominoes, if David Stone doesn't fall right, everything else could fall out of line. Like there's no question it all could have gotten sideways, even including Jaden Jackson. Jaden says, well, I wanted to play with my buddy and, an Oklahoma native, and he doesn't want to go to OU. What does that tell me? Should I, you can get into that hypothetical all day long, but I do. I think David Stone bought Oklahoma I don't know if credibility is the right way to say it, but it said, hey, elite defensive lineman, you can come here. Because, guys, we've watched as Oklahoma's recruited Peyton Bowen, has recruited PJ Adebawore. But at the time that PJ was a recruit, or, that was really a primary for OU, he wasn't that level. He wasn't seen that way nationally and didn't have some of the notoriety. It was later and long after his commitment that everybody figured out, oh, he's really special. Except for yours truly, of course. But that's a whole nother conversation. But with this and with David, I really thought he just made it acceptable for a guy to pick Oklahoma. And I think Nigel Smith's probably in the boat anyway. I think Danny Okoye is probably in the boat anyway. But there's nothing wrong, and those guys are smart enough to know if you're going to the SEC, you need all the guys like that around you that you can get. Doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to get doubled all day if you don't have David Stone inside of you, if you're Danny Okoye, or next to you if you're Nigel Smith. So I love what David brings. And, there have been some that have kind of questioned him and talked about, whether he's worthy of his ranking, and even, some within the On3 network. But when I went and watched the kid, all he did was dominate. I mean, he was all over the field, didn't come off the field. I had heard some, he's a little lazy, that kind of stuff. I just didn't see that. I didn't see any of it. So again, I couldn't be higher on what they've done with the defensive line class. And Miguel Chavis and Todd Bates, they deserve a ton of credit because they're basically rebuilding this group. And I remember being there the night of Nigel Smith's commitment and having a conversation that in their first two classes, they've landed, I want to say I've thrown the stat out before. It was something like 4, with the commitment of Nigel, I think it was 4 top 100 defensive linemen in their first two classes. And in the previous decade, I think Oklahoma had landed 2. And that just tells you how drastically they've changed the narrative in a very short amount of time.
Josh, who of this group do you think can make an immediate impact? I know David Stone is the crown jewel, and I do think he's somebody that's going to play for Oklahoma next year. I think he'll find his way onto the field in some capacity. But is there anybody that you're like, that guy could make a real impact? I really like Jaden Jackson. I think he's maybe the most underrated of this group of 5. But is there one guy that you're like, hey, that guy's going to make an impact? What, Eddie?
Well, I was just going to say, and with that said, it kind of helping soften not necessarily the blow, but getting Jacob Lacey back, getting DJ Terry back. It doesn't make these guys all of a sudden have to come in and be difference makers. They can be, mentored by some of the older guys. They can come in, and I think just showing up as a freshman, it's a lot to ask. Hey, you got to come in and be a difference maker from day one, as opposed to somebody that can come in, be comfortable, build a little bit of confidence, and then maybe you look up and they start coming on slowly but surely. Go ahead, Josh, on your thoughts on who could be a instant impact guy.
Yeah, and I think, Eddie, you bring up a really good point there. And I think it's fairly well crafted for those young guys right now where they don't have to be the guy, like you said. But at the same time, there's not a huge backlog of guys in front of them like there might have been in 2023 when Oklahoma had so many bodies and so much depth. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to look at is I think opportunity is there for the guys who are ready and can go take it. But at the same time, there's not so much pressure that, hey, you've got to play even if you're not ready. So I think they're finding a nice balance. Obviously, we know they want a little bit more out of the portal. But I think you're going to see, I think if there's a portal guy, it's going to be the right guy. I don't think it's just going to be a body kind of thing. Yeah. So, but as far as a guy that I would say is ready or not ready to play early is so unfair, but I think is capable and is going to be hard to keep off the field. Guys, I'm going to surprise everyone and say Danny Okoye. I am enamored with Danny Okoye and what he can be. And watching him out there against Army Bowl, which, again, I want to be clear to people that maybe don't understand. The Army Bowl does not have the level of talent of the Under Armour game or the All-American Bowl, but that's a bunch of D1 signees. That's not a bunch of chumps. That's not a bunch of guys that he was playing at the homeschool level. And I don't mean to say those guys are chumps, God. I know that's going to go wrong. But I'm just saying it's not the questionable talent that he has faced through much of his high school career. Those are real guys, and they're really good players. And he was the best player on the field from almost everybody I talked to. And that was my takeaway in the quarter and a half, 2 quarters I got to watch. So I just think with Oklahoma's need to really just have a shot of life into that pass rush. He is the guy of this 5 that can bring that because he is so explosive off the edge. He's so twitchy. And is he limited? Sure. There's only certain things you can do. Maybe he's a third down guy, but I think a lot of what maybe we thought we would see from R. Mason Thomas, Danny Okoye can do some of those things because, guys, Danny is every bit as big at this exact moment as R. Mason Thomas is, probably bigger. So to say that he can't physically hold up, I don't believe that at all. It's just going to be, can he be a 3-down guy? I think that may be a lot to ask for such a young guy. But if you can find the right scenarios, put him in good pass rushing situations, I think he can be extremely useful from almost word go.
He's also the best interview that we did.
Unbelievable.
If you've not checked out our signing day video that we put up this morning, please go check it out because
talked to 13 different guys, just kind of about the recruiting class and going through the recruitment, their relationships with some of their position coaches. Danny Okoye, you talk to him and it's like talking to a guy that has been through the kind of the media car wash already.
It's like he has a podcast.
It doesn't seem like he's a freshman.
Yeah.
At 6'4", 240, he did play homeschool football, Josh. Is it almost kind of weird to say? Is he a little bit underrated just because you haven't been able to see him go against the Jinx of the world or the Bixbys of the world? Like, if he would have been playing 6A football for the last 3 years, are we looking at a guy that might be like a top 15, type 20 top guy in the country just because of his God-given ability?
Guys, the last game of the year, no, maybe the second to last. One of my final games I saw this year was DeSoto and Cedar Hill.
Yeah.
Dudes everywhere. Lots of good players. DeSoto ended up number 5 in the country. Danny Okoye would have been the best defensive lineman on that field, and it wouldn't even be close. Like, it's not close. So he, to me, is a top 50 guy in the country, and I don't need to see anything more. I don't need to. My last question that I had was, how is he going to, to the question that we just talked about, how big is the gap going to be for him from what he's faced to what he's going to face the first day of practice in Oklahoma? It's still going to be huge, guys. I'm not telling you it's not. And I could absolutely buy, okay, he's going to hit a freshman wall, early November. Like, I could see all of that. It's absolutely in play. But I wanted to see, how does his talent play when the other talent steps up? He looked like the same guy. He was all over the place. He's way too explosive. He's way too strong, because that's the thing. Guys can look at him and say, oh, man, he's twitchy. But until you've stood next to Danny and know that he is legitimately 6'4" and 240 pounds and is absolutely just carved out of wood.
Watch him run here.
Again, yeah, I mean, guys, I know people can say, well, look who he's playing. Look at that human being. Like, people that size don't move like that, guys. Like, that's not – and again, like, just these little subtle things and his change of direction, I mean it was unfair. And, for all the people that, again, and fairly can say, oh, the level of competition is not good. It's not. I'm sure Danny would tell you the same. And he acknowledged it after the game. It was the first thing he said was, I guess maybe I could play with 6A players, or something along those lines. And guys, I've always said it. I remember watching Adrian Peterson playing 3A in Texas, and there were some good players he played against, including a kid that went to Texas, and none of them were any match for him. I'm not saying Danny is Adrian Peterson. I'm just saying guys that are that special, they're just special. It doesn't really matter who's in front of them. And I think Danny has a chance to be one of those guys.
He just looks like a freak. Like, his arms, like, you're just like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
You spend all your time waiting for something to be wrong with Danny. Like you guys said, he's incredible to talk to. He's incredibly gifted. Like, he's super outgoing. Like, there's really nothing that you find about Danny that you're like, oh, I don't like it. Like, now I will say there are times when you watch him for Noah and like he'll be the last guy to come in off the bench, but people will say, oh, well, he's lazy, he's got an attitude. He's also the punter. He's also on kickoff. He's also just run ragged because he's a special talent, and Noah's trying to win a national title for the second straight year this year. So, you kind of understand it. But I love the story that came out of the Army Bowl, and I'll be real quick because I know we've talked a lot about Danny here. One of the coaches on the staff said, hey, we had him on kickoff coverage, and he was just gassed. He'd been playing defense and kind of was worried about him. And basically, Danny said, "Hey, coach, I could use a breather here if you can get me one." And coach is like, "I need you. I need you out there this time." Danny tracks 50 yards down the field and makes the tackle on kickoff coverage. And Danny just kind of looked. He said Danny looked at him and was like, "I got you, coach," and like went out there and made a play. And you're just like, that's the kind of stuff where you're like, that's different, man. Not every guy can pull that off.
As far as the defensive line group, it's going to grab the headlines. That is kind of the position group that when you talk about this 2024 class, when you talk about stuff that you have said, Josh, being one of the best groups that maybe in the last 20 years that Oklahoma's brought in, and you remember where Oklahoma's headed to the SEC and the need for defensive linemen, it makes a lot of sense why we'd start there. Let's go to the other side of the football. Another position group in the offensive line for Bill Beatenbow, where they signed 5 guys: Josh Iasosa from Edmond Santa Fe, 6'4", 305, Daniel Akinkumi from East London NFL. I guess NFL Europe, is that technically the NFL developmental high school over there, 6'5", 310, who I just absolutely thoroughly enjoyed talking to on the YouTube show. Isaiah Autry, 6'7", 300 out in Fulton, Mississippi. Eugene Brooks from Sierra Canyon High School, 6'4", 320, a 4-star, as well as Oklahoma's 5th and final piece of the offensive line group in Eddie Pierre-Louis from Tampa Catholic, teammate with Lewis Carter, who you went and saw last season. You'll see some of his highlights in this as well at 6'3", 320. Josh, let's start at the guard positions, because if you look at it just on the surface, you got to like what they're bringing in.
And I do. And I think that's the thing that people get lost with in this offensive line conversation, not being pleased about, whatever the class may be. The thing that you have to remember, I think all of these guys are capable of becoming starters and quality players. Now, is there some of the upside we've seen in some of the previous years? Like, I love Logan Howland. Obviously, I was a huge Caden Green guy. So I think that's where you get into a little bit of a conversation. But these are good players. Like, these are not, there's nothing that tells me any of these guys can't start at Oklahoma or can't start in the SEC and be quality players. Eddie Pierre-Louis, and can we, just for a second, all the Lewis and Louis kind of conversation, I thought Brent threaded that needle really nicely with the Louis thing. He kind of combined the two, and I like that. So maybe we just go with that, whether Eddie thinks that's the right pronunciation or not. But yeah, I like this group. I do. And I think Josh Iasosa is a really raw prospect, played a lot of basketball. But I think he is a very natural fit for Bill Beatenbow. When you talk to guys who can be very honest about where they are, where their strengths are, what they aren't. And I think those are the kind of guys that Bill tends to work very well with. And guys, look back at a guy like Ben Powers. Ben knew exactly who he was and exactly who he wasn't, and it worked very well. Now, does Josh become Ben Powers? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying I would expect him to be a guy that Bill can get everything that there is to get out of him. So I like the group. I like the interior offensive line. I think Brooks, Iasosa, and obviously Eddie Pierre-Louis can all be standout guys, starters at least. We'll see what goes from there. But Eddie is the guy that you look at and you kind of say, okay, there's probably something more there. There's a level he can go to that I'm not sure the other two can, just because of his size and his violence. I mean, he finishes as well as any offensive lineman I've seen in this class.
Josh, I'm putting you on the spot here again because I asked you the same question about the defensive line, but you look at this roster currently as it is on the offensive line, they're going to need some help up front next year. Almost every spot is pretty much open, it seems, for competition. Are there any of these guys, somebody that you could see maybe stepping up like a Caden Green did this last year, where he all of a sudden is a starter as a true freshman? I know that's rare for Bill Beatenbow for that to happen, but are any of these guys even in that conversation?
The only guy I could really believe, and it's just because of the level of talent he's played against, is Eddie Pierre-Louis. And he's not enrolling early, so I just don't think that's something that is very likely. Guys, we all know how demanding Bill is, how much he wants things to be perfect. The list of guys who came in the summer and played any real role, we know that's incredibly short. It's just unlikely. You look at Iasosa, like I said, a lot of basketball background, really didn't start playing serious football until his junior year of high school. He's going to need some time. Brooks is interesting because kind of like Pierre-Louis, he's played a lot of football against good competition. I mean, his last game was against Modern Day. So, I mean, that kind of tells you what he knows about and the kind of level of talent he's faced. But I think he needs to change his body up a little bit. I think he's going to have to really work in the summer. And if he can do that, change it around a little bit, continue to build muscle, it's possible. I mean, it's not out of the question, but I don't think it's likely. Again, and that's just the difference between this class, where I'm talking about the defensive line group, where there's so much upside and there's so much potential. The offensive line group is very standard, I guess would be the best way to say it. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not bad. It's just I don't see a lot of guys that are those early, flashy, got to get them on the field and see what they can do kind of guys. And that's, again, that's the question a lot of OU fans have about this class is where is that next great offensive lineman in this group? And I can hear a case for Daniel Akinkunmi. I think there's a lot of untapped potential there. I think he's made of the right stuff. Is very, very much focused on being, just a day-to-day, I'm going to be better today than I was yesterday. And he's worked with NFL coaches, being at the NFL Academy there in London. So he understands better than people think he does what the work is going to look like. It's just a matter of once he goes against, Oklahoma-level talent, what's that going to look? It's just like what we were talking about with Danny a little while ago. How big is that gap going to look for him?
I don't mean to put negativity out there, but it's going to be a question that a lot of people ask. What do you think is the biggest hurdle for Oklahoma right now in going and landing somebody like the David Stones of the world on the flip side of the football on the offensive line? What has stopped Oklahoma, in your opinion, from being able to get to that elite category when you're talking about offensive linemen?
It's a great question, Eddie, because you would think, I mean, just like we just talked about, Todd Bates had to rebuild the identity of that defensive line room because there's no NFL track record.
Sure.
There's no position on Oklahoma's roster that has a better NFL track record right now than the offensive line. I mean, you could make a case that the best left tackle, right tackle, and center in the NFL are Oklahoma Sooners. Like,
sure.
That's a crazy thing to then turn around and say, yeah, but they have trouble, But, the thing to remember with all three of those guys that kind of, might give some people some perspective on this. Creed Humphrey was a 3-star. Lane Johnson was a converted JUCO quarterback. And Trent Williams was a 3-star at Longview. So offensive line is, to me, I think even more than quarterback, it is one of the most difficult positions to project from high school to college because the gap is so different and you are so rarely at that level playing guys that are of your size and of your athletic, caliber. So, again, I think this class can be good. I can buy an argument that there is a lot more there than people think. But at the same time, you can't deny that most of these guys were not Oklahoma's initial offers. So you can't say, well, we think these guys are better. No, you didn't. That's not the way you handled that. So we'll have to see what goes on. But I think the biggest hurdle is really just finding a way to build these relationships and kind of continuing to make these guys feel like, yeah, Bill's tough. And everybody knows Bill's tough. But he's not like a tyrant. He's not some awful, I think people make too much of that sometimes. And I wonder if that gets into kids' heads at times. I'm sure there's probably some negative recruiting that goes on about those things. But, the guys that buy in, all they do is excel. I mean, we're talking about guys changing their body types, like Brooks or Eddie Pierre-Louis. Anton Harrison was the same way. Anton Harrison had a bunch of bad weight he had to get rid of and then went on to become Bill's first-round pick because he just bought into the work and he did what he had to do. And I think that's what you have to get over. It's guys like, it's such a cliche, but, do the work and the payoff will be worth it. That kind of conversation has to happen because there's nothing that immediately says, oh, this can't work because of this. Because, guys, we've seen Bill land elite players, but it's just strangely the elite ones are the guys that haven't worked out all that well.
It'll be fun to see, and especially, the guy that probably goes under the radar for a lot of people if you aren't in the Oklahoma circle, Jerry Schmidt, it seems like, takes in those offensive linemen, and it just almost a little bit of a miracle worker in terms of if he can find a bond with some of these guys. Like a Eugene Brooks seems like a guy that if him and Schmidt could get on the same page, all of a sudden you look up in August and he shed off a little bit of that the weight. I think that you end up looking at a guy that maybe he does end up filling in as something on the offensive line, and obviously at a position where they need a little depth. They need to be able to build a little depth here over the next couple months.
Yeah, and guys, I mean, I'm sure that and have heard the same things, but I don't think there was anybody more excited about the return of Jerry Schmidt than Bill Bedenbaugh. Like that was a 100%. Those two are in sync on what offensive linemen should do, what they should look like, and what their mentality should be. And guys, again, to kind of add some conversation, for all the talk of, Caden Green leaving and that kind of stuff, the guy that, and we've said it over and over again, the guy that you hear people talk about is Heath Ozida. That was and I'm not even like scolding OU fans. You should have seen Heath Ozida coming. I went and saw Heath Ozida in person last year, and I thought he was a good, solid player that was at least 2 years away from being able to help Oklahoma in any meaningful way. And now he's a possible starter on day one of his redshirt freshman year. Like that exists for him. So again, like let's just see what happens with some of these guys. I know people are down, but I am a stars matter guy all day, every day. At the same time, I can't ignore a guy who has the developmental track record that Bill Bedenbaugh has. He's shown an ability to find talent where others didn't see it and turn it into NFL football players.
Just real quick, Eddie Pierre-Louis did do 25 reps of 225 a year ago, and I was just wondering, Eddie, how many reps do you think you could do?
225?
225.
Like the NFL Combine?
Yeah.
I think I could confidently say 0.
I think I could get it one time. Josh?
George, you're a gym guy. Oh, yeah, I got...
If we're doing like a scoop combine, I don't think that I would excel very high.
I think I'd win.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would hope
you would win in the combine.
You're the
I
youngest and you worked out every day.
You think you could get 225?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. I know
Josh.
I could get 225.
Hell yeah.
God, it sounds like such a meathead jerk. Like it is a question of how many. It's not nearly as many as it once was, but I could do enough to not hate myself in the morning.
I'm just saying 25 for a 17-year-old is insane.
Yes.
I mean, between Eddie,
that's monstrous.
What are they doing inside the Tampa Catholic gymnasium? Like the summer workouts between him and then the legends of Lewis Carter lifting. It seems like that was incredible.
Lewis Carter lifting is like, I don't know, the closest thing to Adrian Peterson lifting I've heard in a while. Like the stuff he does, you're like, he's 205 pounds. That shouldn't be possible.
It's crazy. All right, let's move on to a group that I feel like has gone completely under the radar, Josh. The defensive back group. I combined safety and cornerbacks. That's how Oklahoma announced it as well. It's a really good group, though, when you look at it with Michael Boganowski, Junction City, Kansas, 6'2", 205. Eli Bowen, the brother, younger brother of Peyton Bowen from Denton Guyer, 5'9", 165. Jaden Hardy out of Louisville, Texas, 5'11", 165. Devon Jordan out of Union High School up in Tulsa, 5'11", 170. Jeremiah Newcomb, who I feel like nobody has talked about in terms of how big of a get that is at 5'11", 175. The coach of, or the son of his head coach out there at Gilbert High School, or Gilbert, Arizona, Michael Patterson McDonald from here locally at Westmore High School. And then Reggie Powers, a guy in Centerville High School in Ohio that Oklahoma was able to jump on, that I feel like still people haven't gotten enough, he hasn't gotten enough shine because of the day that he committing during at the very end of the Kansas game because of the hour delay. It just never really seemed like there was enough attention thrown that way. But the group that Jay Valai, Brandon Hall, Brent Venables bringing in on the defensive side for the second consecutive season, it seems like there's something there in the Oklahoma secondary.
I love this class. I mean, like, for what it is, and it's not as flashy as the year before. Like, we all understand that the the Jacoby Johnsons, all the All-Americans that were part of last year's class. I really like what they put together in this group. And I know, Brent talked about it, guys. And it's something I've said over and over again. Eli Bowen's offer had nothing to do with Peyton Bowen. They love Eli Bowen. Like that is, and you could tell in the way Brent talked about him, they think he's special. They think he is a top shelf cover guy. He's a little undersized. We all know, probably about 5'9", 180, but he can really run. He's very athletic, very instinctual. And like Brent talked about, he is always around the football. Guy makes a ton of plays. Devon Jordan and Jeremiah Newcomb, you kind of get a little longer players, a little bit more of kind of what we expect Brent Venables to focus on at cornerback. Newcomb is a prototype, big, long, athletic guy, really, really kind of what you're looking for. Jordan, I talked about this, I can't even remember. There's been enough stories that I kind of lose track of which one it was. But with Jordan today, I was talking about going up to see them this spring, and he's just hanging out. He's kind of watching some of his younger DBs go through drills there at Union, Eddie. You know how they do that, where they kind of split off the younger guys and that kind of stuff. And he's watching some of the younger guys. Well, he sees one of the, more physically impressive younger guys kind of shoving around a smaller guy. And he immediately jumps in the drill and just whips this bigger kid for about 3 straight plays. I mean, just works him over. And he was like, this is how we do this. This is what we do. This is why we do it. And it was very oh man, that's not, it wasn't anger. It wasn't him trying to bully that kid. It was showing you okay, that's cool that you're big and strong, but you're doing it all wrong. And so I thought that said a lot for his leadership, the kind of player he is. And so again, my thoughts on him grew tremendously that day. I was impressed, because that's not something I see, and I go to a lot of practices. So I like that. But then, and if we want to, kind of split it up a little bit, the safeties, that class and what Brandon Hall has done with that safety room just continues to astound me, guys. To just go grab a guy like Reggie Powers. Reggie Powers, I put up in our class awards article that went up about an hour ago. If there's one guy in this class that I would say he's going to be successful, or, I give away my last dollar, I'd bet on Reggie Powers. I just think he is going to be a very good football player. Now, does his upside go as high as David Stone or Danny Okoye? No, probably not. But there's every chance that he is an all-conference level player, and maybe more. I just think Reggie Powers is very good and brings everything you could look for in a safety to the table.
This secondary class, I think, is maybe one of the more underrated groups of this class, just because, obviously the defensive line is going to get its shine. We talked about the offensive line. I think we're going to get to the receivers in a bit, which I think is a really solid group too. But the depth of this group, I think, is really big. And you talked about the safeties. Michael Boganowski, Eddie and I went and saw him in person. That's a stud. He's gonna end up being, I think, a hell of a football player. You mentioned Reggie Powers, and then Eli Bowen, and maybe it's just because I loved his interview so much, and his brother Peyton is also just a great interview. Those two kids are just they just get it, man. They have definitely been raised right. You can tell their parents understand the game. And those guys just get football. They know what to say. And so it just makes me think Eli's probably not on that same level as Peyton. He definitely, in terms of being rated as highly as Peyton, but the dude just makes football plays. And I think that goes back to what this staff is going after is football players, guys that are just dogs, right? The cliche, you always hear that. Eli Bowen falls into that category. So I don't know. I think the secondary group is a really solid one.
It really is. I just don't have a lot of flaws. And guys, one of the crazy things is Jaden Hardy is almost a consensus top 200 player in the country, and nobody talks about him. Nobody mentions him, nobody brings him up. And he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's not the most explosive guy in the world. But every time I've seen that kid, all he does is make football plays. He's just around the ball all the time. And, I'm certainly not going to compare him to Billy Bowman, but there is some element of Billy Bowman, because Billy was the same way. Not real big, not real flashy, but man, all he did was make football plays. I don't think Jaden's of that level because I think Billy has a little more juice, was a little, just a little more explosive. But Jaden is kind of the same way in that he just has an instinct and he is always around the football. He makes good decisions. He's a good tackler in space. All the little things that we've seen Oklahoma incrementally improve upon over the last couple of years under Brent Venables and Brandon Hall, I think you'll see that from Jaden Hardy. Like, he is a guy that gets it and understands what is expected of him.
There's Boganowski, which, by the way, we were getting a question in the chat, Josh. Yeah. Who's going to play Cheetah of this group? And I think Boganowski kind of told us when we went and saw him in Kansas that they had talked to him about playing some Cheetah. So I would assume it's him, but are there any other guys that you could see them maybe fitting into that Cheetah type role?
Oh, with the way they have been willing to flex, who was there, we've seen Peyton Bowen play some Cheetah. We've obviously saw Deshaun play some, Kendall Dolby. They leave it pretty open-ended, but obviously you've got to be physical. You've got to be willing to come up and play run, do some of those things. I would say, aside from Boganowski, the guy that probably sticks out to me in that way is Reggie Powers. And that's largely, like I said, I'm bordering on a big old man crush on Reggie Powers. Like, I just love the way he plays football. And he's one of those guys that, kind of like Kendall Dolby, when I watched him last year at NEO, there was, even when he was wrong, he kind of made it right. And that's what I see from Reggie Powers too. Like, he might be a little out of position or his angle's a little off. He'll find a way to make a play. And to me, and again, Brent Venables would giggle at me saying this, but that's kind of what Cheetah is. Like, it's almost like a sweeper for those that follow soccer, like at an American level.
Here we go.
Just fit. Yeah, I know. Briefly, bear with me. It's just cleaning up where others have gone wrong. Like, okay, you run wide. The Cheetah's there to clean it up. Okay, you got something out in the flats in the pass game. Like, he's got to be there to fix it. Like, there is just an element of, like, this guy's a really good football player, and we got to find a way to get him on the field. And I think Boganowski and Powers could both fit that role. Boganowski's incredibly interesting, but I thought what he said to you guys in the interview was really telling, where he talked about, I'm going to be working on my back pedal. I want to work on that. Like, it's not lip service. They plan to really give him a run at safety. And then if he grows into something else, man, he grows into something else. And that's okay. And I know I saw somebody ask earlier, could he grow into linebacker? Absolutely. He's a big guy. That's on the table. And I think we know Brent Venables he's creative enough to just let a guy become what he's going to be and then sort it out afterward.
I would also say that just meeting Mr. Boganowski after the game when we were up in Kansas, really good guy, just standing next to him, I think Michael Boganowski, the son, has a little bit of room to grow as well. He's a big guy. Like, I don't have a problem, or I have a problem thinking that he wouldn't be able to add the weight needed if they wanted to bump him down into the linebacker position. Really good group in the Oklahoma defensive secondary. I can't believe that this is an Oklahoma football live stream and talking about a 2024 class that signs not one, but two quarterbacks. And it's funny that we've gotten this far in. Jackson Arnold, obviously the future of the program at the quarterback position. Michael Hawkins, the 2024 6'1", 185 quarterback out of Frisco Emerson High School there in McKinney, Texas, as well as Brendan Zerber, a 6'2", 185 three-star quarterback out of Alliance, Ohio. They'll both, I believe, be early enrollees, which is kind of interesting to add a little bit of depth when you get to the spring football situation. What do you make of both of these guys? Like, I think that Hawkins is kind of the known, and then you have the Zerber kid that relatively nobody really knows a whole lot about, just in terms of this guy that's just going to end up at Oklahoma.
Last time they signed two quarterbacks worked out pretty well for him too, right?
Well, I think that it had a little bit to do with, certainly the high school and probably the friends around one of the quarterbacks coming out of Putnam City North High School. It's true, Josh. All he did was go on to win a Heisman Trophy and be the number 1 overall pick. Sam Bradford, maybe you heard of.
Yeah, we drove. We were up in Oklahoma City last week, and the family drove past Putnam City North, and there was no mention of Sam Bradford.
Drive,
Eddie
you didn't take any
Radosevich
pictures?
did come up.
Unbelievable.
But Eddie Radosevich was brought up in the conversation. And
Good.
to the folks from Wikipedia that are undoubtedly listening, the fact that Eddie is not one of the notable alumni is an embarrassment to your entire website. So, they need to get on that.
That's a fact. That's a fact. What do you make? Let's start with Michael Hawkins. Just in terms of you look at the numbers that he was able to put up. He led Frisco Emerson to a state semifinal appearance, ending up losing to eventual state champion, I believe. They got beat by DeSoto.
Runner-up. They got beat.
They got beat. Erase all of that. I had the flu over the weekend. I tuned in a little bit, didn't watch all of it. My bad. A hell of a year, though, for Michael Hawkins, a legacy player come to Oklahoma to follow in his father's footsteps.
Yeah, I mean, guys, you can look at a lot of the stats. And, I mean, Michael accounted for 52 touchdowns this year. I think final tally was like 4,400 yards of total offense, something like that. So, I mean, just astronomical numbers. What I noticed is he went from a 56% passer at Allen as a junior, which is pretty pedestrian by the standard of, playing at a place like Oklahoma, to 69% as a senior at Frisco Emerson. Now, there's other things to take into account. That's not apples to apples. We all know it. But it shows growth as a passer. It shows that he was refining his game, continuing to get better, and doing so in his first year with these receivers, with that offense. Like, there's a lot to say it could have been even better with a little more familiarity. So I thought Hawkins, it's weird for me to call him Hawk because I think of his dad when I say Hawk. But, he is a tremendously talented athlete, can really sling it. I mean, you see some of these throws, like that's him throwing to Zion Kearney, who we'll obviously talk about here shortly. But, there's a lot that you like about Michael Hawkins. He's just going to need time. People that want to, say, oh, he's got to be something immediately. He needs time to develop. He needs time to continue to refine his game. But now with his athleticism and what he can do as a run pass guy, it wouldn't shock me if they found some sort of, just a little series or two for him here and there just to get his feet wet a little bit next year. Because again, if it breaks down, Michael Hawkins can hurt you with his feet. I mean, he is very lethal. So, I think that could be an interesting possibility for a quarterback room that we know is looking for its number two option, whether it be from the portal or, amongst their signees.
Because he can do stuff with his legs, do you think that would be something that maybe Seth Luttrell, you make a couple packages, kind of like how they used Jackson Arnold to get his feet wet early in the non-conference season before you get into SEC play, just so if something, God forbid, happened to Jackson Arnold, you're not just throwing in a green, true freshman quarterback into a game in Auburn or, at Ole Miss or wherever.
Yeah, I mean, if Mike's going to be your guy, then you've got to do some stuff to have him as ready as you can possibly be. Because, I mean, again, it's guys, we're talking about an offensive line that may have 5 new starters at the 5 positions. So, there's a lot to go over there and a lot to think about. And at the same time, you've got, a young quarterback that's going to be learning his way through things. So there's going to be some growing pains, whether those are just mental or possibly physical. So I think whoever it is, whether it's Michael, whether it's Zerber, like whoever it may be, I think you've got to find a way to get those guys some snaps. And for Mike, it makes all the sense in the world. You could do, and I don't even want to limit him to say like, oh, it's a belldozer. Like Mike can throw the ball. Like it's not like that. It's just, we're going to do some stuff. We're going to get him out in the corner. We're going to give him a read or two and make it pretty simple. And if not, hey, get upfield and get what you can get. And just to throw a curveball at the defense, I don't mind that idea at all. I think that could be kind of fruitful for them just to have a thing that a defense has to spend an extra 30 minutes a week working on, just a package of Michael Hawkins being again, his dynamic self out in space.
This is going to sound insulting, but none of us have seen Brendan Zerber play. Like, what can we expect from him? Like, what does he bring to the table, Josh?
How did he end up in Norman? I think maybe would be a question as well, just because it almost seemed like it kind of came out of nowhere.
Well, what's crazy, guys, is I say all that about Michael's athleticism. In fewer games this year, Zerber ran for more yardage. In like 11 games, he ran for over 1,000 yards, and Mike ran for about 900 and 14 games, 15 games. So, and again, don't get me wrong, Michael's a better athlete, but I just want to put it in perspective. Brendan can really move. He's a very good athlete. I want to say he's a hurdler, and I think made it to state last year in Ohio. So, a talented guy. But with him, again, some of the two quarterbacks complement each other really well. The things that I have some questions about with Mike are sometimes his release, his mechanics, the consistency of those things. And I thought he was better this year. So I don't want to say like it has just lingered. I think he was better, but I think at times, you just kind of got to keep working on it until that's no longer an issue. With Zerber's almost a robot. Like almost every time he throws the ball, it looks the same. He acts the same. Like his feet are very similar. He can get a little wide sometimes, but by and large, I like what he does. And I thought it was a really good find by Jeff Lebby. And to what you asked, Eddie, so basically how this played out was he was set to visit he was going to visit Syracuse. Syracuse offers him. Right before he takes that Syracuse official where he knew he was going to commit, Northwestern offers him. So he takes that visit, commits to Syracuse, comes back. Northwestern continues to recruit him. They bring him to campus. He commits on his official visit to Northwestern. Within I want to say it was 10 days or maybe 2 weeks, the whole Pat Fitzgerald thing happens at Northwestern. And all of a sudden, he's kind of back on the market. Syracuse has already pivoted to another direction. And obviously, I think he probably saw, Dino Babers might be in trouble, which we all now know he absolutely was. And Oklahoma just kind of calls him out of the blue, just gets in touch, sees him, likes the film, and goes after him. He comes down for the party at the Palace, and I think within about 4 days had committed to Oklahoma. In early August is when he pulled the trigger. So kind of a winding road to get to Oklahoma. But guys, he was a player I went in with very low expectations when I saw his film. I thought, okay, this is just a guy. He's a stopgap. They're trying to find a body. He's a good player. If you told me that 2 or 3 years from now he's a starter at Oklahoma, I don't think that's insane. Is it the bet I would make? No. But there's more talent there than people believe. And again, Eddie, again, 2006, there was a 3-star that nobody believed in except for a young Mr. Radosevich. And
there were people that believed.
There's
no doubt
who
about
knows?
that. There's no doubt. There's people that were believing already, yelling at, just jumping up and down throughout the Fiji house as a freshman.
You had just started a riot on his behalf. Yeah, that sounds right.
Somewhat.
But I mean, and in much that I can remember talking to people about Sam when he signed. I said, he's going to be a multi-year starter at OU. I think he's a good player. And I'm not saying I predict that for Brendan, but if you told me that's the case, I don't think it's crazy. He is a good athlete and he throws the ball well. And I think he really places it nicely. Like it's not always perfect. It's not always the touch you want to see. And you hope those things will develop, but his placement is good. And I think that's a place to start from for Oklahoma.
Yeah, Syracuse wanted Andy Bass, preferred walk-on out of Heritage Hall, to play quarterback as well. The Orange are probably not happy with Oklahoma's decisions in terms of recruiting because they basically took 2 of their quarterback commits off the board. Pass catchers in the 2024 class. Devon Mitchell, a tight end out of Los Alamitos High School. I think everybody probably well aware of Devon Mitchell and the importance that he is to this group, as well as Zion Kearney out of Hightower High School in Missouri City, Texas. Ivan Carrion out of Odessa, Texas. Zion Raggins, as well as KJ Daniels round out Emmett Jones's recruiting class at the wide receiver department. And I think it's probably safe to say, I would say that it's probably easy to say, Emmett Jones has done it again with some of the guys that he's brought in.
He really has. And guys, the thing that amazes me, and I tweeted about this today, people forget that Zion Kearney is Oklahoma's second most highly rated commitment. Like I don't think there's a healthy respect for how good he is. Like Zion Kearney is, and you guys, you're looking at him. I mean, that is a 6'2.5", 6'3", like 200-pound high school senior. Like, and look at the lower body. He's not a guy that's going to struggle with physicality or strength. I mean, he plays good Houston high school football. Took his team to the state quarterfinals, and actually kind of fought his way back. He got hurt late in the year and thought he was done. And Hightower went deep enough into the playoffs that it bought him the time to get back. And he came back, had a big touchdown, nearly took him to the state semis where they just got nicked by eventual state runner-up Summer Creek. So he's a guy that I like a lot. And then you throw in the speed of Zion Raggins, the all-around ability of KJ Daniels, just a guy who can do a bit of everything. And Ivan Carrion, the game I saw him was not his best game. And he and I talked about it afterwards. He knew it wasn't. Had some drops, just kind of struggled through the night. Sometimes that's just the way it goes. That's the game you see. But you watch tape of that guy, and he is just running past people. I mean, he's a legitimate 6'6". He is an enormous wide receiver. You guys saw him at summer camp when he came and worked out. A lot of people thought, oh, he's a tight end.
Yeah.
He's a receiver. I mean, and Emmett,
it was
I'm
the
pretty sure
damnedest
Emmett
thing.
Jones would fight you about it. Yeah. So, again, even if he's a jump ball guy or you bring him in for 10, 15 plays a game where he's running vertical, with his size and his speed, he can be dangerous and worthy of a spot just because of that.
I love this group. And I think that it has a good mix of, like Josh just said, just about everything. But my takeaway, and at least talking to those guys, these guys love Emmett Jones. I mean, Emmett Jones has only been here now. I don't think he's been here a year yet. I think he was hired in January of last year. He's like skyrocketing to one of the best, if not the best, like individual recruiter on staff right now. I mean, you look what he's done in this class, what he's done in the portal, and what he's doing in 2025. I mean, Emmett Jones, Josh, seems like he is just taking off right now. I mean, these kids love him.
Yeah, I mean, guys, they're in the point in 2025 where they're going to have to turn away some really good players. Like, I mean, they just don't have the numbers to reel in everybody that I think he could bring in. I mean, that's just the way that's going to go. So, Emmett Jones has impressed me, and everybody told me when he was hired, and I knew Emmett a little bit from his high school days, but that was a long time ago. So I really didn't know what it would look like for him as a recruiter. And we've seen him recruit pretty well at places like Kansas and Texas Tech. But we all know at Oklahoma, you're recruiting a different level of player. Like you just are. And I know for any Red Raiders fans are mad at me. They landed a 5-star today. Well done to Joey McGuire and the guys. Love Joey. So, but day in, day out, you're not going to lose many battles to Texas Tech at Oklahoma. So I thought it was a really impressive thing to watch him hit the ground so quickly with a bunch of guys. And I don't think he reached and tried to say, oh, I'm just going to go get a bunch of top 100 guys. He knew the guys he wanted. He chased those guys. I would say really the only loss he had that still surprises me is the Bryant Wesco situation. That's a tough beat for Oklahoma. I thought they were in good shape there. Clemson just kind of won in the end. But Kearney was a big one that I didn't think Oklahoma had a great chance with. And almost from the minute Emmett arrived, Kearney was headed to Oklahoma. Like it really happened fast. And, carry on, like I said, a guy he brought with him from Tech. KJ Daniels was a guy that he was pursuing. And guys, an interesting note about Zion Raggins, only guy in this class that was pursued by the previous staff. Like he was offered so early on that even Riley was involved with him. So I thought that was kind of something interesting. And, it's somebody you just pointed out to me, and I kind of forgot about it. But I just like what they've done here. And there's a lot of versatility in this class, a lot of different ways they can attack you with this wide receiver group.
What do you make of Devon Mitchell? I know that we've talked about him before right here on the SoonerScoop.com YouTube page. We talked about him when you came back from Los Angeles. Needless to say, as important as it was to get a David Stone, maybe the same could be said on the offensive side of the ball at a position that really needs some help with depth.
Guys, I've been doing this since 2002. He is one of the top 3 tight ends OU assigned in my time covering that. And the other 2 were Jermaine Gresham and Mark Andrews. So that's all I really need to say. Devon Mitchell should be at worst a second-day pick in his future. He has that kind of ability. that kind of talent. He's so big. He's so physical. I think as he gets with Jerry Schmidt and works kind of on his lower body and just changing his movement skills a little bit, he'll only get better. Like that's the thing. He's so good right now. And again, you watch him there, even he's a blocker. I mean, he's not a kid that's there's nothing arrogant about Devon. Like he's going to block, he's going to be physical, he'll do whatever he needs to do. And you add that to his just natural physical gifts, and he should be a special tight end. And George, I'm going to beat you to the punch. He absolutely should have a huge role next year.
Yep.
There's no reason why he won't have a very real impact and be at worst Oklahoma's second tight end next year, in my opinion.
I think he might start like game one, day one. Like I there's not,
which is wild when you remember too. He reclassified. I mean, he should be at 2025. He should be a junior in high school right now, and he's going to be showing up on campus to basically begin his college career, stepping into what you said, George, maybe possibly starting for Joe John Finley.
Which part of that's because of where the tight end room is currently, but the other part of it is I think he's ready. Like and again, I haven't watched him a ton, but you look at his size, and I remember seeing him out at one of the camps this summer, and he's just massive, and he wasn't even working out. I remember we were standing there, and I was like, oh, is that so and so? I think I was like, is that Williams Winery or something? Like
start listing off like defensive tackles.
Yeah, we were talking about defensive linemen, and we're like, oh no, that's Devon Mitchell, and I was like, holy moly, that guy's massive. So I think he looks phenomenal. I think he'll be somebody that plays from day one.
The tight end position, obviously, and there's gonna be more, I would imagine, just in terms of the portal and seeing, they got the Bauer kid out of southeastern Louisiana. Maybe you end up taking one more. It's going to be interesting to see how they work those numbers, Josh.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And I like the kid that got out of southeastern Louisiana, guys. We've talked a lot about not, focusing on where they are, that kind of thing. This is a guy that was converted quarterback. They moved him around a little bit. But you watch what little tape you can find on the guy. He's a big athletic kid. I mean, they ran him at Wildcat quarterback. That should tell you that they see him as, arguably their best player with the ball in his hands. I mean, because they could do it with anybody, and they're choosing to do it with their tight end. That says a lot about his overall athleticism. And I think it's another good find for them. And to me, if I was going to bet on anybody to start, I'd probably bet on him. But, George is not wrong. If Devon Mitchell goes in and just hits the ground running, there's no reason he can't take that job. He is that level of gifted, and Oklahoma has that level of opportunity. I mean, it's kind of a perfect marriage right now.
Last but not least, the running back position, DeMarco Murray's room. A little bit of concern on Wednesday morning as we were waiting for Brent Venables to shuffle in for the press conference. But the news does come out. Taylor Tatum signs with Oklahoma, as well as Xavier Robinson, the massive running back, 6'2", 221, out of Carl Albert, just won another state championship with the Titans. We were there for his commitment ceremony. It seems like just yesterday, but that was all the way back in the middle of June or the end of June. And he joins Taylor Tatum, who, you talk about him and you talk about James Nesta, both guys that are going to play dual sports at Oklahoma with the baseball program and the work that, Ryan Gaines and that group did to kind of lay it all out there, the plan that they had in place for Kyler Murray. Taylor Tatum, I'm telling you, he's a really good running back, obviously, but you talk to the baseball folks, they are so excited about Taylor Tatum as well as James Nesta. But let's talk about Taylor Tatum, and then we'll get to Xavier Robinson. When you talk about the number one position or the number one running back in the country, Josh, Taylor Tatum, what makes him so good?
I would almost answer that with a non-answer of saying there's not any one thing about Taylor Tatum that just screams to me. Like that, there's not that obvious trait like, oh, he runs 4.3 or, oh, he's so powerful. You talk about Xavier Robinson. We know what makes Xavier Robinson special. Like he's got great feet and he's incredibly powerful. Taylor is a skilled receiver. I've talked about it over and over again. They love to line him up at the slot in Longview and throw him the ball. That was one of the stories that during, if we remember this summer during his announcement ceremony, he did with the local Longview kind of media company.
Yeah.
they were talking about his big touchdown catch. They weren't talking about a run. They were talking about his catch against, I believe it was McKinney in 2022. So there's just a lot that he brings to the table. But again, kind of a guy, like I've mentioned with a few of these guys, you watch the tape and you're like, oh, that's a big kid. You stand next to Taylor and you're like, dang. Like, I mean, he's 5'11", 205, 210. I mean, he is well put together, very thick through the lower body, very powerful, but at the same time is a guy that can run away from you. And that, again, I talk a perfect example for everybody. That touchdown run that we've showed, and I've mentioned it before, the guy that just flipped, the 5-star safety that just flipped from Florida to Texas, the Xavier Filsami kid, that's against him and that defense that had multiple other Division I players. You'll see Filsami coming from the far side, number 1 right there. You only see him for a split second, but that's him right there that just comes through the back end. And again, he's on the other side of the field. I get it, but that gives you some perspective. Like Filsami's a big time track guy, and Taylor Tatum just takes that again, a wildcat situation, just breaks through a really, really good McKinney defense and goes and scores. And, so again, I think there's so much to like in Taylor Tatum. And to me, with what we know, the shot in the arm we know that running back room needs, I don't know any way on earth he doesn't get an opportunity. Even though he's only coming in at summer, if there's a position that you can pick up quickly enough, it's running back. Like we know, like that because if you can make plays at running back, you can make plays. Like it's not like you're relearning something or having to understand. You've got to know the offense. I'm not saying it's simple, but it's there to be had for a special talent. And I think Taylor Tatum is a special talent. I think he's one of the really elite guys in this class, both positionally and in Oklahoma's class in general. So I just like what he brings to the table. And there's a nice complement between he and Xavier Robinson. And guys, 2 years from now, if you're tackling these two guys, I don't care if you are an SEC linebacker, you're sick of Oklahoma by the end of that game. Those are two big, sturdy dudes.
Josh, I like the running back room. I don't want this to go as a knock towards the current running back room. I think Gavin Sawchuk really had a nice finish to the season. But is Taylor Tatum automatically the most talented, at least potential-wise, walking into that room?
Yeah, I think he is. And guys, and George, obviously, you didn't have to listen to all my diatribes, but Eddie's listened to plenty of them. I loved Javonte Barnes. Like, I thought Javonte Barnes was going to be special. I was a big fan, and I still think that is possibly there for him. But based on 2 years of what we've seen, the only guy I would have said, okay, maybe that guy could be at that level is Hollywood Smothers, and we know he's gone. So I just think Taylor is the most upside play of all those running backs, because as much as I like Gavin, I think there's some limitations, and I talked about those in high school. So I don't know that they've changed that much, but he is a physical guy. We know he's got speed. Like there are things I really like about Gavin, but I just think Taylor is a little more complete, a little more instinctual as a runner than Gavin is. And if you told me by Texas he was your starting running back, I wouldn't be shocked about that. I just wouldn't be.
Wow. So there it is. 1 5-star, 15 4-stars, 11 3-stars make up a 27
I got one
player.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Recruiting class. Go ahead.
Just one guy that we just didn't really talk about because he's the only player in his position group.
Yeah.
James Nesta.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about him. I think he's a guy that I don't think he's going to contribute next year. He walks into a linebacker room that's pretty full, and I don't really know where they see him playing. I think he's listed as an edge actually on 3. But any thoughts on him, Josh? We didn't get to talk much about him.
Sure. No, and I'm glad we got a little chance to talk about him. But with James, again, I think you bring up a really good question. I could see him at linebacker. And I know, guys, I want to say during Brent's press conference, he mentioned James as a possibility at all 3 linebacker positions, which obviously includes Cheetah. I don't see Cheetah for him. I think he's very much a downhill guy. I think it's really going to come down to what his body does over the first year or so on campus. Like, because if you told me he grows into a 6'3", 6'4", 245-pound defensive end, I could buy that. Like, I think that's possible. And Oklahoma can kind of buy that time, like you said, George, because they have Samuel Omosigho, because they have Lewis Carter, because they have all these young linebackers that we know they really like. They can let James Nesta develop, and there's not all that pressure of, well, he's got to be our second, Will. He's got to be our backup Mike. That doesn't exist. So they can let that happen a little bit naturally. And I think when that does, my guess is he ends up as a defensive end, or at the very least, like a stand-up outside linebacker and like a 3-down set. That would be that's what makes the most sense to me when I watch him. Because like I said, he looks very instinctual and very natural coming off the corner, rushing the quarterback, stacking up a tight end to play the run game. He just looks better when he's in the box than when he's out playing wide. And it's not because he doesn't have the athleticism to do it. I think that's just where he feels most at home.
If he has time to develop, that might be music to Skip Johnson's ears, because he'll just haven't been in the bullpen throwing fastballs, where there's a lot of people that are excited about him as well on the mound for Oklahoma moving forward. So there it is. Oklahoma, Josh, they're number 8 right now in the team ranking. Do you think that holds? Is Brent Venables going to reel in another top 10 class?
I do. I think they'll finish in the top 10. I would be pretty surprised if that changed. Now, if you told me they slipped down, somebody jumped in front of them, got one of these, kind of final big pieces, that's possible. Yeah. I need to really look at the numbers tonight to be sure of that. But I think it's 8 or 9. I would be pretty surprised if they move much more than that, because like we talked about at the top, there's not a lot of elite guys there to really move the needle, much less are those guys likely to pick the programs that are directly behind Oklahoma. Jordan Seaton can move the needle, but Maryland and Colorado aren't going to close the ground on Oklahoma. So, it would take something that surprises people a little bit more. And maybe he pivots back to Alabama, where everybody thought he was going a month ago. Well, Alabama's not going to jump Oklahoma because they're already up there. So, that's it's tough to foresee that being any kind of big problem.
Josh, people are mad at us about basketball. Basketball is starting here momentarily, but I know Brent said today 27 or 28 guys is what they hope to sign. Who is maybe that 28th guy that you could see? I know Dominic McKinley didn't sign today. He's been a target. Anybody else out there that that you'll be keeping an eye on for the second signing date?
Yeah, the other is and both defensive linemen is the D'Alen Evans kid from Longview Pine Tree. And a guy that I've mentioned before, good friends with Nigel Smith. They have a relationship. So I wouldn't be shocked if he took an official visit to Oklahoma in January. I think that's very possible. Dominic's obviously already used his. Dominic's an interesting situation because Oklahoma has already used not only their official visit, but they're in home from Brent Venables. So I can't help but wonder if Oklahoma thought maybe he's going to sign early and we can make a real big push right here before signing day, and maybe we steal something here. For him, it feels like probably he sticks with A&M, or maybe he goes and stays at LSU. State decides in the end to do what most Louisiana 5-stars do, and that's go to LSU. Oklahoma's pretty unlikely. The Evans kid has talked up Texas a lot here in the last 24 hours. I think maybe it was Steve Wiltfong, if I'm not mistaken, but Oklahoma has a chance there, especially if they can get him on campus. That relationship with Nigel will help a lot, and can kind of, make up for some of the lost time where maybe they didn't have a long-standing relationship with him. But I bet this class ends at 27, but it's not impossible to say that maybe they could steal one of those guys.
Very good, gentlemen. It's Josh, pour another drink. Sit down, maybe watch a little OU basketball as they get underway here against North Carolina out in Charlotte. And we appreciate it, man. It's been a lot of fun to catch up, go through position by position group in terms of what Oklahoma has coming in this season. And a number of these guys you're going to be seeing here during the spring football with 20, I believe, of the 27 early enrollees for Oklahoma. So it's crazy. It always seems like this thing rushes up on us, and then all of a sudden you blink and it's over. But Oklahoma's 2024 class, we move on to 2025, where I think that we have talked about before, they are absolutely murdering in the state of Oklahoma with 6 of the 9 guys that are currently committed in the 2025 class. Not just in-state guys, but highly, highly ranked elite guys that we will get into here further down the road with talking about the 2025 class. And it's a good time to join Soonerscoop.com as well. Plenty of stuff happening with the portal. George and I and Carrie and Bob, we're all headed down to San Antonio for the start of Alamo Bowl practice. Oklahoma will be arriving on, I believe, Christmas Eve with a practice scheduled on in San Antonio on Christmas Day. So it should be pretty good. And then Oklahoma basketball, obviously a top 10 ranking right now as they take on North Carolina. They get game getting underway here shortly out at the Spectrum Center. So $54.99, 1-year deal, Soonerscoop.com, signing day sale. I believe this goes on until midnight tonight, and take advantage of that. George and I will be back on I think tomorrow. We have a special guest coming up that we will sit down, and I think it is going to be one that Oklahoma fans are going to want to group around the television to see as we catch up with the long lost friends. So we appreciate it, Josh, man. Really good work on this class. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how all these guys, when they get to Norman, how they end up kind of filling in on Team 130 and on as Brent Venables and everybody else moves into the SEC. So for now, there's going to be plenty of stuff, plenty of post-game wrap-up, plenty of NSD wrap-up in terms of everything that is this 2024 class. So thanks again for joining us here on the Soonerscoop.com YouTube channel, and we will talk to you next time.